So, are you seeing in the colleges or in the younger generation that there's more fall off, or that there's this sort of uncoolness to be a Christian?
Yeah, what you see is there's a movement, we've been studying it for years, kind of Pew has been reporting on this also, of people who would have in the past claimed an affiliation with a particular religious belief, who now, when polled, well, they'll say, no, I have no religious belief. They'll check the box that says nuns. We see it's called the rise of the nuns, the growth of the nuns. That group is growing. It's in the low 20s right now, percentage-wise. And it seems that as it grows by 1% or so a year, it is coming off the number of people who previously called themselves Christians. I don't know that this necessarily means that Christians are leaving, although we do see that young Christians are far more likely to either, number one, hold a view that's really not Christian, they don't even understand that it's not Christian, or two, walk away from the church altogether. I think we see that statistically true. But the real question is, do we really have, how can I say this, if we had a big pot, and those were all the people that called themselves Christians, but in that pot we had a little cup, and in that little cup were people who not only called themselves Christians, but actually understood what Christianity teaches.
Right.
That group would have been much smaller. This larger group said, yeah, I'm a Christian, but what does that really mean? Well, I really can't tell you what that, they just kind of are cultural Christians. They were kind of raised in this system, but don't really even understand the core teaching of Christianity. That group is much smaller. Now, that group that was in that big pot in the past, I think was comfortable being in that pot. But as things have kind of tightened down a little bit in the culture and it's shifting away from Christianity, those people are jumping out of the big pot into to the larger environment. I don't know that the cup is shrinking at all. The pot is shrinking.
Yeah.
But the cup may not be shrinking.
Right.
And if we stop and think about it, well, in this big pot before, who were the real Christians? Were everyone in the pot? Or just the folks who were in the cup? Probably just the folks who are in the cup. So while the pot is shrinking, I'm not sure the cup is.
Right.
So I think there's hope for us to know that maybe nothing has really changed in terms of those people who actually understood what Jesus taught and embraced what Jesus taught. The people who really believe this were probably, that number may not be shrinking at all. I think the future will certainly show that to us. But here's what I do know. There are an entire group of people now who would say they have no religious affiliation. And that group is not claiming to be atheist or agnostic. That's a box they could check. They're not checking that box. They're just saying, I'm not over here anymore. That is a mission field. Those are people who can be reached with the truth, because they are not saying, I'm against it. They're saying, and they're not saying they're for that. They're saying, I'm just no longer part of that pot. Well, it's time for us to get serious and grow the size of the cup. And if nothing else, I hope the work that we do in thinking, number one, we're called to do this. We're called to worship God with both our heart and with our mind.
Yes.
All of it. It's a holistic approach. And a lot of us have not really been thinking much about what we believe. And I think the acts that we actually spend, the time we spend thinking about this and talking about it, look, this is an act of worship. This is when you spend your time on this, this is an act of, you got to sing in order to worship? You got to pray in order? No. This is an act of worship. It's talking about this. We're worshiping God with our mind. And I think when we do that and we grow, we're going to grow that cup. People who are able to worship God with their minds. And that's really, I think, the goal of my personal mission, is to have people shift from what's either an unreasonable faith or a blind faith to what I would call a forensic faith, a faith that, number one, is reasonable, is biblical, and can withstand the pressures of culture.
So then you could segue into my final question. So for the next, say, 10 years of your activities, your work, your effort, your purpose, what is it going to be directed toward?
When you look like this, and you're an old guy, it's probably going to be in the context of being an older guy. And I think what that, for me, when I was a youth pastor, I became a believer, and then, within 8 or 10 years, I was youth pastoring, and I loved it. My kids, of course, were the age of my youth group, so I had my own children as part of that. And I realized as a youth pastor that I was not going to be the cool 28-year-old youth pastor who will go surfing with you and wakeboarding with you and snowboarding with you. That's not who I was. I was 40. I was already too old to do those kinds of things, and at least I wasn't interested in those kinds of things. I was a cop. I was working full-time as a detective. And I realized that I wasn't going to be able to connect with high schoolers on the basis of my coolness. Instead, I connected to high schoolers on the basis of my paternal relationship with them. And I had worked years in gangs where I saw what lack of dad led to. Because all the gangsters I worked, regardless of what they were racially, economically, socially, they all had one thing in common: lack of dad. It looks different. Sometimes dad's a workaholic. Sometimes dad is in custody. Sometimes dad's just a deadbeat and never shows up. Lack of dad looks different. And I realized that working in youth pastorate that you can fill that gap, that every one of us can take that step and fill in where somebody else has dropped the ball. And so I think the experience I had in youth pastoring was that I wanted to step in and be that paternal role model, or that paternal relationship. You don't come to me for cool, you're not going to get that from me. You already know that. You're going to get dad from me. But for a lot of young men and women, dad is, it's related to lower criminal activity. If you've got dad is present, lower rates of teenage pregnancy. If dad is present, you can go on and on. Higher educational levels of dad is present, less poverty if dad is present. All these things are related to lack of dad. So I think in the next 10 years, we've written adult books, and now my wife and I are writing children's books, and then we'll be doing high school books. I think we're going to spend time investing in the lives of young people, really not from the cool factor, but just because we are parents who care about kids. And even though our kids are grown right now, I think it's important. By the way, you remember when our kids were young, we would do anything that was in the best interest of our kids. So you pick a restaurant, it's not the one you want to eat at. Right. No, it's the one your kids will eat at, right? You pick a movie, it's not the one you want to see, it's the one your kids want to see. Oh, you pick a vacation, it's not your destination, it's the one that's good for the kids. Right. Well, now we are a family called the church. And we've got kids. They may not be our kids, but they're kids. I think every decision we make as a group going forward ought to be through the lens of we're raising kids. Oh, you don't like that kind of music? We're raising kids. Oh, you don't like that kind of thing, that kind of retreat? We're raising kids. Oh, you don't like that kind of calendar? We're raising kids. And if we would do that, we would raise up a next generation that would be amazingly committed and wouldn't suffer from all the lack of parenting that I think in some ways a disintegration of family that is the problem at its core. And we could actually address that from a Christian worldview that calls us to family. So I think the next, for us, 10 years will be trying to do what we can to strengthen family.
Well, I wish you very well with that, and I think you'll probably be very successful in what you're trying to achieve. Thanks so much. I mean, your context is so unique, and I think really kind of thrilling. It's an intellectual thrill ride, the way that you approach and describe this, and your passion and energy is contagious, and I very much appreciate you spending time here with us today.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
That's it for this particular interview. Thanks for joining me. Really excited to take this ongoing journey with you as we keep bringing more content. If you haven't already, you really should subscribe to this channel. There's a lot of phenomenal content coming down the road into the future that you'll want to know about. Leave a comment down here. I think people would love to hear from you, and then you can hear from them too. If you liked it, go ahead and give a like. It only takes half a second, and share this with people that you care about. The world needs more light in it right now. So thanks for being with me. Hope to connect with you again soon.